everybody! We are making this special video to welcome jack loom weavers into our Vävstuga world. Thank you so much, Lisa Hill, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Becky introduced me to her methods probably 10 years ago, and I had already been weaving on jack looms for about 20 years. I was so excited and delighted to be brought into the magical kingdom at Vävstuga, but what really surprised me was how many of the techniques and methods Becky showed me could be taken back to my home studio and used on my jack looms.
So this is the towel that we're going to demonstrate on today.
So I was a standard back to front loom dresser on my jack looms, but after I came to Vävstuga and learned many of Becky's techniques and methods, I changed to a hybrid method that I think is super efficient. You may be familiar with it through Laura Fry or Deb Chandler, and it deploys a lot of the Vävstuga methods that you can see in Becky's video, but using a jack loom. We're going to show you some of those today.
If you're curious how this warp was wound, or how the cross is tied here that the leaf sticks are now through, I refer you to the tablecloth section of my original basics video, because I go into a great amount of detail there of how to use the warp mill and wind the warp, and use these wonderful choke ties to tie up the warp chain. 11. 12, 13. 14, 15. And now, Lisa, you can show them how you do this here at the table.
For you jack loom weavers who may be unfamiliar with this setup, what it is we're using a reed instead of a rattle to spread our warp so that we can then beam it, and we're sitting at the table comfortably, which is an advantage. So now that I have my cross safely in the leaf sticks and attached to the reed stand, I'm going to undo some of these choke ties. And these are the Vävstuga Special Super Deluxe choke ties, available to see how to make them on Becky's videos. So I'm untying the cross here, and I've got my reed marked in a way that you as jack loom weavers will be very familiar with. I found the center, and then I marked out my width from my project sheet, which is 16 inches. I'm going to spread some of the warp threads a little bit and give myself a little bit of slack so that I can bring the threads into the reed. So right now what I'm doing is what's called a rough sleigh. I'm not sleighing for our final sleigh, but I'm pulling loops, intact loops of 4 threads through every other dent in a 12-dent reed. And one of the principles behind this is that when we spend all the time and effort measuring a warp to perfectly even lengths, the idea of cutting these loops and breaking those perfect measurements is upsetting to me. and so in the Swedish method, or in the Vävstuga method, one of the principles is that the loops are never cut because they've been so carefully measured. And we're using those loops to find 4 threads in each group here, because this warp was wound with 2 in hand, which also is a principle in the Swedish weaving world where you wind with multiple threads. It makes beaming easier. It makes less friction between the threads as you're, applying them to your loom. Okay, so once I have a small group done, I'll put some tension on these threads so that I can find the least space there, and I'll open that up and I can put my supplemental tie-on rod. For my purposes, I use 2 tie-on rods, the one that's attached to my loom and a supplemental tie-on rod, which then I attach to that tie-on rod, and we'll see that a little bit later. And it works well on jack looms. So I'm going to continue to pre-slay the warp with 4 ends in every other dent. And if you look at Becky's videos, she has a method that's super, super speedy, that you can even, I think this is very speedy, but you got to see Becky do it. It's very speedy. And so I'll continue this to the end of the warp and until I get it all pre-slayed to my desired width. And then we're going to move over to the jack loom to show you how to get the warp onto the loom and start beaming using a trapeze, which is super exciting. I'm going to put some tension on these threads. There's one that got out of the lease there. And find the lease and the front lease stick. Check it. Slide my rod in there to hold it. And I can even move it back so that the threads are all nice and even. And I could do it in small groups when you're starting. It's good to start with small groups, and then as you get bolder and better at it, you can do it for bigger groups. And I think one of the things that I found so much better is that 2 things about the rattle. First of all, it's super annoying. You catch your clothes on it all the time. It's, having nails sticking up at the back of your loom is not nice. One of the things I really like about this method is that you're using the reed for your rough sleigh that you will use in your final sleigh. And so doing the math is much easier than figuring out what your number of threads per inch and counting them out in a rattle is. And it gives you a much finer increment in terms of spreading your threads, so you don't get bunching, you don't get a lot of threads crossing over each other as you beam your warp. Ready to go to the loom. So now we've brought the tie-on rod, the reed, the lease sticks, and the whole warp over to our jack loom. And the first thing I'm going to do is place the reed in the beater, trying not to catch any of the dangling threads. And then while the reed is sitting there, I'm going to move this tie-on rod back, and sometimes you have to wiggle it a little bit, and get it just nestled in these little leashes, and they're going to act as another pair of hands for me while I get the trapeze sorted out. So I've got my tie-on rod here, and you'll notice it's got a little safety string, because if it slides, we don't want the warp threads to fall off the tie-on rod, so we've got a little safety string there to ensure that it won't. So I just roughly center the reed in the beater, tighten my beater cap so it stays there. Right now the lease sticks are just sitting on the shuttle race, and I'm going to grab my warp chain, bring it underneath the breast beam and over the trapeze, and then we're going to get a weight and put some weight on it. There we go. So once we get the weight on it, you can see that this is a little vulnerable here, but I don't want to attach it to my other tie-on rod firmly. I want to attach it fairly loosely because I still need to adjust these threads, and I can't adjust them until I get the weight on the thread. I have some rubber bands here. So I'm going to use these rubber bands to, and I can pull this off, to firmly, but still with the possibility to adjust it, I'm going to rubber band the two tie-on rods together. And that's going to hold it firmly enough for me to put the weight on the warp chain. Okay. Got my weight in the form of water in a jug with a hook, and I'm going to attach that to my warp chain with a special little bit of Texolve. And once the warp has some weight on it, we can start making adjustments, making sure that the threads are coming through the reed straight, and also make sure that the threads on the tie-on rod are coming directly from the reed back to the tie-on rod. So you can be as finicky as you want to make sure that all these threads are coming as directly back to the tie-on rod as you can make them. And once you do that, you have to make sure that you secure the two tie-on rods more firmly than with rubber bands. You're going to use the choke ties to tie the two rods together before you start beaming. Clean it up a little bit, because we want all those threads to beam really straight, so it takes a minute to clean up. Adjusted. Once they're generally tidied up, we're going to get some more of these super handy dandy choke ties and tie in 3 places. And make sure you tie securely, going around a couple times, because you definitely don't want this to release when you have tension on the warp and you're weaving. I'm not being quite as finicky as I usually am, but and then we're just going to bring it back a little bit so we see that everything is And then straight. Wiggle these forward. Ooh, little wiggly. Okay. Beans like a dream. Then I have my sticks. And I release my brake and just bring it over the back beam right down to the warp beam and insert sticks. 1, 2, and I particularly take care, you probably saw all those knots I was tying to secure the 2 tie-on rods, so I'm particularly careful to make sure I have sticks over those surfaces so that the threads aren't distorted by those ties. Put a little extender on here so that we can keep beaming over the trapeze. Fairly haphazard with the sticks, but that's just the way. And once we get the least sticks to where we can maybe a little bit more, I want to have enough length so I can actually put the weight draped over the front beam, the breast beam. A little bit on the least sticks, there we go. And then I'm going to move the least sticks back, and move the least sticks back up against the reed and let them just rest there. And then I'm going to take the weight off the trapeze, and we can actually take the trapeze off at this point. I'm hoping. And I'm going to reconfigure it so that the weight is hanging off the breast beam. Okay. So now we can actually take the trapeze down, and we will a little bit more. And then I'm going to show you how to move the least sticks to the back behind the heddles so that you can thread from them. And we'll use the little leashes for that as well. Set these here for the minute. For this method, you need 3 least sticks, and I only have 2, so I'm going to use this little rod to just demonstrate it. So to move the cross behind the reed, I'm going to take my least stick closest to the reed, turn it on its side, and basically hold this part of the cross using the 3rd stick. Then I'm going to wiggle this stick behind the heddles And normally this would be my third least stick, but I forgot to bring it. So I'm just going to tuck it here for now, hoping it stays. And then I'm going to remove that least stick from the front, move the second least stick up to create the second shed of the cross, and use that least stick I just pulled out to create that shed of the cross. Move that to the back of the loom. And now that I have my cross duplicated, I'm going to, and since I use that rod instead of a least stick, I'm going to go ahead and replace that now by just basically doing the same thing, which is creating a shed, using the rod and sneaking in an actual least stick in here. The mate to my other least stick. Okay, once that's done, I can actually dangle my least sticks from these little leashes, and that will be what I use to thread from. So the warp is beamed. It's ready to thread. Easy peasy. One person can do it by themselves with the help of the trapeze. Now that my cross is secured behind the heddles, I'm going to go ahead and cut my loops that have been intact this whole time, keeping tension perfectly. And I'm going to go ahead and cut them, and then I'm going to pull them out of the reed. Okay, and I like to pull them out of the reed in groups of 1 inch. Since we're doing 24 ends per inch, I'm pulling out in groups of 6, because there's 4 per dent, so 6. And that should be 6 times 4 is 24. I pull it out of the reed and I just let it dangle, ready to thread in inch increments. So we're taking off the breast beam for ease of threading. And once we take the breast beam off, and make sure to not lose your barrel nut, it goes right in the pocket. The breast beam slides off, and once that's off, you can actually lay the beater down on the floor so that you can sit inside and thread with ease. So I've got groups of 24 threads, and I've counted out 6 heddles on each of my 4 shafts. The threading that you'll see on the draft that Becky has provided is a straight draw. In the Swedish tradition, it's written 1, 2, 3, 4 from the shaft furthest away from you towards you. The shaft closest to you would be shaft 4 in this case. In the American tradition, that would be, we would be counting it 4, 3, 2, 1. The thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter whether you call it 4 or 1. It's the same sequence over and over again, and that's how we're going to thread this loom. And you'll notice that when you're threading from the back to the front, you actually have a better sight line. So whether you call it 1 or 4, it's actually preferable when you're doing straight draw to start at the back and work towards yourself. It's easier to see, fewer mistakes. Oops, fewer mistakes as I fail to thread the eye. And I will say that before I started, I was counting heddles and in the way that jack loom weavers typically do with metal heddles, and longing for the textile world. Some things are better in one. When we do the tie-up, I'll tell you that I vastly prefer the tie-up on jack looms. But as far as moving heddles, it's such a dream on Swedish looms versus the jack loom. So every side has its advantages and disadvantages. I tend to like to not use threading hook. When I'm threading, I just like to use my hands, and I like to use one hand and hold tension on my group of threads. Now I have to check because I'm coming to the end of my bout, but I haven't used up all. I'm missing one back here. That should be 6. Oops, discounted. Cut. Okay. Oh, that's right. 2 and 1. So this is what happens when you go 3, 2, 1. Okay, that's correct. So that's 1 inch, and we only have 15 and a half to go. Secure it just like you do in both traditions. So now I'm sleighing the reed, and that will be familiar to you, but I am noticing that having threaded from the shaft furthest from me toward me, it was easier to thread. Now that I'm sleighing, it's actually quite a bit easier to sleigh having threaded from the shaft furthest from me toward me. And I just wanted to mention that. It just goes much faster. It's easier to see your heddles. After this, we're going to tie on, and you can use the method you're used to, but I do encourage you to look at Becky's videos because you might see some tips and tricks that make you a more efficient make your process easier and more efficient. I encourage you to look at those videos.
And so when you get in the swing of it, it goes right along.
And now Becky's going to meet you in the classroom and talk about converting the tie-up.
Welcome to my whiteboard here. I have our towel project up here, complete with a cute little hand-woven band for hanging it up on a hook. And it's got a treadle. It doesn't have to have a treadle, but for this purpose we're using a treadle. And I decide which shed we're in. We're in this shed. And we get to weave back and forth with this little quill. You can see the treadle mechanism that works to make a shed with our ankle style shedding system. And here is the project sheet that goes with this piece, which you can find on our website, and if you can't find it, just email us and we will point you right to it so that you can try this project at home right away if you want. And of course it can be in any colors. We've got a purple one, I've done it in green, and we have lots of color options for you that we can guide you to as well. But we want to talk about the tie-up, which is down here in the corner. But the first step just before that, here is the threading that you've just seen at the loom. Lisa was threading starting with the shaft at the back of the loom and working towards the front. So you can think of this as a bird's eye view as you look down on the shafts. And something that I think is often a confusion is the numbering, and it just so doesn't have to be a problem. So what I've done here is, maybe you're familiar with calling the back shaft 4, 3, 2, 1 at the front. Seems logical. But then here we've labeled the back shaft 1, 2, 3, 4. We've started our threading sequence at the back, so if you're going to count forward, 1 seems logical there. To be perfectly honest, when I'm threading, if I'm threading this way, I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's just as likely if I reverse my threading the other way that I might still say 1, 2, 3, 4. It's really up to you how you want to talk to yourself while you're threading. And these numbers here, either way, it actually doesn't matter. It works just fine either way. It's just a name. We're calling that 1 and 2. We're calling this 4. We're calling that 3. But it's really just a name. And so here I've taken it one step further. We could just name the back shaft Peter. The next shaft could be Regina, and the next one could be Sam or Paula, or, Peter could be called 4, or Peter could be called 1. My point is, it really doesn't matter. It's just a name. You can use the numbers that you like. On my project sheets and the way I was trained to thread, straight threading was starting at the back, and so we just counted forwards, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's how you'll find it in the Swedish books. That's how you'll find it on my sheets. But if you're used to 4, 3, 2, 1, you can simply cover up my numbers and put your own. You can really make this your own, and so whatever's comfortable for you. And so now here we've added more stuff. Stuff being treadling, the treadling order. And I have my treadle order here, 1, 2, 3, 4, from the right. But again, it doesn't have to be. But if you think about this, if you want to use your right foot, if you're right-handed, maybe you're right-footed, maybe you want to start with your right, you don't actually physically want to start on the left side because you end up kind of moving your leg over where it's uncomfortable and treadling your leg away from your body. And that's uncomfortable. What's comfortable is starting with your foot on the outside of your body and moving your leg to the center of your body. And so this is comfortable with your right foot. Going the other direction, from starting on the left side of the treadling, would be comfortable with your left foot. But again, you can decide how you want to do it. You can decide what numbers you want to use. And so here, I'm just kind of reiterating, but visually, you could label this 1, 2, 3, 4, or 1, 2, 3, 4 from the left. It really doesn't matter. I tend to think about it right-hand treadle or left-hand treadle because then that gets very specific. But the numbers, again, they're just a name. It really doesn't matter so much. But if the dot is on the right-hand side, that means you're stepping on the right-hand treadle. Now let's talk about the tie-up. And I understand this is something that can be confusing to jack loom weavers. Is it a sinking shed, a rising shed? What does that even mean? And I recently learned that some jack looms might actually pull shafts down rather than lift them up. And so what we're talking about is the thing going up or the thing going down, the thing being a shaft? Is it rising or is it lowering? And how do we not get confused about that? So down here is the way I usually write out my tie-up. Here's our shaft, Peter, Regina, Sam, and Paula. Those are our 4 shafts, and I've numbered the treadles. But the dark squares here, dark is heavy, dark goes down. And so these dark squares are getting pulled down. If you want to mark the ones that are rising, which is not a bad idea, you could mark the white ones to be risers. Let's take a look up here. Here, I've marked my rising shafts. So everything that's white down here in this box has got a little circle here, which I like to call a little helium balloon because you can visually think about that rising, and I think it helps. So these are little helium balloons rising those sheds. And so here is our visual image of these lovely helium balloons lifting those shafts And then these two are getting lifted by those helium balloons. It's just to keep in mind, those circles mean that the shafts are going up. The lighter color, lighter means up and lifting. And so here is another depiction of the same tie-up. So my point is, these two tie-ups are identical. Here, if you pull the black squares down, you're lifting the white ones up. And here, my helium balloons are still lifting the white squares up. Here we have it marked with circles, what's being lifted. But you can see it's exactly the same thing. We're lifting the same shafts. And so hopefully this is not going to be a confusion going forward. All of my sheets in my video classes will be written this way, but you know to lift the white squares.
So I'm all tied on and ready to weave. I tied on the way that I usually do, and so I'm going to have to weave an inch or so to close the gaps of my warp. But if you refer to Becky's video, she has a great tie-on method that wastes less time and less warp, if you want to refer to that. So I may have to... And then 2 more. So for more information on weaving this beautiful project, look to Becky's website, where she will take you through it from beginning to end, from winding the warp to finishing the towels.